Picture this. A stone castle looming against a black sky, torches sputtering along the walls, casting long, jagged shadows across damp stone corridors. Heavy boots echoed down the passage, armored guards pacing back and forth, their spears clanging faintly in the silence. And somewhere just beyond their reach, whispers. Soft, dangerous, forbidden, because in the medieval world, love wasn't just a feeling. It was a weapon, a secret, a gamble with stakes so high. The wrong kiss could bring a crown crashing down. Imagine living in an age where desire itself was treason, where a queen's fleeting glance at a knight wasn't just flirtation, but a spark that could ignite rebellion, where a king's hidden favorite could topple dynasties, where gossip in a cold hallway could be deadlier than a sword. Now here's the question. What makes someone risk everything? Their throne, their armies, their very survival. Was it love? The kind that poets sang about, the kind that promised eternity? Or was it something darker, an addiction to danger, a hunger for the thrill of stepping too close to the edge? Because make no mistake, these weren't fairy tales. This wasn't Cinderella sneaking out for a midnight dance. No, these were real men and women, flesh and blood, commanding armies by day and playing with fire by night. And the flames? Oh, the flames consumed more than hearts. They devoured kingdoms. Take a moment. Imagine the setting. Grand feasts in candlelit halls. Tables groaning with roasted boar and silver goblets of wine. Music drifting through the rafters. The laughter of nobles spilling across the stone floor. And beneath it all, the tension. Eyes meeting across the room. A hand brushing a sleeve just a second too long. Silent promises traded under the roar of the crowd. To everyone else, it was just a banquet. But to two people, it was war. Because every glance carried a risk. Every smile could be evidence. Every rumor, just one rumor, could destroy a dynasty. This is a paradox of medieval passion. Kings could send armies into battle without flinching. Queens could rule empires with an iron hand. Knights could spill blood without hesitation. And yet, when it came to desire to love, they became reckless, vulnerable, human, and history punished them for it. A queen who dared defy her marriage vows risked more than scandal. She risked her crown, her freedom, her life. A king who let his heart rule his court risked rebellion from every side. And for the lovers themselves, the price was often exile, or imprisonment, or death. But still they risked it, again and again. Why? Maybe because love, in a world so brutal, felt like the last shred of freedom. Maybe because when your life is scripted from birth, when your marriage is arranged, your role predetermined. Choosing your own heart was the ultimate act of rebellion. Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't love at all. Maybe it was lust, obsession, the intoxicating thrill of danger, the pull of what you shouldn't have. And isn't it the oldest story of all? Picture a queen, cloaked in velvet, slipping through a side passage while the court sleeps. A knight waits in the shadows, his hand trembling as he reaches for hers. In that moment, the crown, the court, the armies, they all vanish. There's only the heat of stolen breath, the echo of footsteps retreating into the dark. It feels eternal, untouchable, but dawn always comes. And with it, the whispers, the suspicions, the betrayal. Because in the medieval world, secrets rarely stayed secret. Servants gossiped, courtiers spied, chroniclers twisted tales into weapons. And once the rumors began to spread, it was already too late. Love letters became evidence. Smiles became daggers. And passion? Passion became a death sentence. Yet this is what fascinates us, isn't it? Not just the scandal, not just the risk, but the humanity. These weren't just monarchs, knights, and nobles carved in marble. They were people, flesh and blood souls, trapped in a system of power and duty, longing for something real, something dangerous. Think about it. Would you risk everything for love? Would you gamble your throne, your freedom, your very life, just for one night of passion? It's easy to say no, to say we'd be wiser. But then again, we don't live in a world where marriages were chess moves and our hearts were signed away in treaties. Maybe, Just maybe if we did, we'd understand the temptation. And that's the story we're about to tell. This isn't a tale of happily ever afters. This isn't the sanitized romance of fairy tales. No, these are the raw, messy, dangerous love stories of the medieval world. Stories where kisses turned into coups, where whispered promises became battle cries, where kings fell, queens burned, and kingdoms shattered because of passion. And the irony? The greater the risk, the harder they fell into it. So tonight, we'll walk the torchlit halls. We'll eavesdrop on the whispers in the garden. We'll slip into the secret chambers where crowns were risked and hearts were broken. And we'll ask the question that has haunted history for centuries. Were these lovers brave, or were they fools? Heroes of passion, or victims of their own desire? One thing is certain. When you play with fire in a castle built of tinder, sooner or later, something is going to burn. And often, it wasn't just the lovers who paid the price. It was kingdoms, empires, entire generations. Because in the end, the medieval world wasn't destroyed by swords alone. Sometimes, it was destroyed by a kiss. So welcome. Welcome to a world of passion and peril. Welcome to the stories of medieval lovers who risked thrones for desire. The torchlight flickers. The whispers grow louder. And the fire is just about to begin. Picture this, the world of medieval Europe, stretched out before you like a vast, unsettling painting. Castles rise on jagged cliffs, their towers like stone fists punched against the sky. Below, villages huddle in the shadows. Peasants bend over muddy fields, breaking their backs to keep kings in silks and queens in velvet. The roads are rough, the winter's cruel, and yet, at the very top of this fragile pyramid, the royal courts shimmer with jewels, feasts, and schemes. But don't be fooled. Behind the glitter of chandeliers and the shine of polished armor, there's no love story here. Not at first. Oh no, this is a world where marriage isn't about candlelight and roses. It's about survival. It's about power. It's about drawing up treaties and signing away lives. Because in this game, love wasn't the prize. Love was the risk. Kings didn't marry queens because they fell head over heels across a banquet table. They married for land, for soldiers, for a bigger treasury, for a better bargaining chip in the endless chessboard of European politics. You want candlelit passion? Too bad. What you got was, congratulations, you're now bound for life to the stranger your father thinks will keep the border safe. And yet, even in this cold, calculated world, desire still crept in. Imagine being a young queen, 15 years old, barely more than child, sent across mountains to marry a man twice your age. Your crown celebrated, paraded around like the finest jewel in the kingdom. And then reality hits. Your entire purpose is to produce an heir, quickly, preferably male. You are a womb with a crown, an insurance policy in velvet. Romantic, right? Now, enter the troubadours. Ah, those wandering poets of the age, strumming lutes, reciting verses about gallant knights and swooning ladies. They painted a picture of a different kind of love. Passionate, secret, reckless. The kind that belonged not in the throne room, but in the garden, under the moonlight. Chivalric love. They called it. But here's the catch. It was a fantasy. It was deliberately unattainable. Married women, often queens, became the muses for knights who vowed eternal devotion, usually without ever touching them. A safe outlet. A pretty illusion. Except sometimes it wasn't just illusion. Sometimes the line blurred. And when it blurred, the world burned. This is the paradox of the medieval court. On one hand, you had marriage as strategy, bloodlines and land stitched together like seams in an endless political quilt. On the other, you had real humans, flesh and blood, vulnerable to temptation. And in that tension, between cold duty and hot desire, history's greatest scandals took root. Let's take a closer look at the rules of this world. Because if you don't understand the rules, you'll never grasp the risks. Rule number 1. Marriages are political contracts. Period. Your feelings don't matter. If you're a prince, your bride might come with a dowry of silver and castles, but you'll probably meet her for the first time on your wedding day. If you're a princess, congratulations. You are now your family's diplomatic envoy, wrapped in silk and sent off to secure a peace treaty. Your hand is less a gift and more a bribe. Rule number 2, heirs are everything. If you're a king, you need a son to carry your bloodline, because without one, your throne becomes an open invitation for rebellion. If you're a queen, your worth is measured in pregnancies, and your reputation depends on the legitimacy of those children. An affair isn't just scandalous, it's treason. It threatens the very foundation of the dynasty. Rule number 3, desire is dangerous. Whisper too long in the wrong corner. Accept too many glances from a knight, and suddenly you're fodder for gossip. And gossip in this world isn't harmless chatter. It's a weapon. Courtiers sharpen rumors like daggers, and before you know it, the court is buzzing with talk of betrayal. Picture it. A banquet hall, filled with nobles laughing, goblets clinking. 2 lovers exchange a smile across the room. To them, it's innocent. To everyone else, it's evidence. 1 smile becomes 2. 2 smiles become whispers. Whispers become rumors. And rumors can become rebellions. Because nothing says romance like signing a treaty with your new father-in-law's army backing it up. Now, here's the irony. The same knights and nobles who condemned sinful love affairs were also singing songs of passion. They wanted it both ways. Cold marriages for stability, and hot rumors to entertain the court. They lived in a constant contradiction, praising loyalty while gossiping about betrayal, demanding heirs while condemning any path that led to them outside of wedlock. And under it all, the very human truth. Kings, queens, knights, they were just like us. They felt desire. They got jealous. They craved affection. They made reckless choices. The crown didn't make them immune to temptation. If anything, the crown magnified it. Because think about it. When your every move is controlled, when your life is dictated by birth, marriage, and politics, where's your freedom? Where's your choice? Maybe the only freedom you can seize is to fall in love with the wrong person, to steal a moment in the garden, to risk it all for a kiss you'll never forget. And that's what makes these stories so magnetic. It wasn't just about love. It was about rebellion. A queen defying her king wasn't just cheating. She was shattering the fragile illusion of dynastic order. A king favoring his lover wasn't just scandalous. It was destabilizing, enraging nobles, sparking whispers of revolt. Love in a medieval world was never private. It was public dynamite. Picture the high stakes. A single letter discovered could mean execution. A single rumor could mean imprisonment. A single night of passion could ignite a war. And yet they did it anyway. Again and again. Lovers risked everything, knowing the punishment, knowing the danger. Why? Maybe because love made them feel human, in a world that stripped them of their humanity. Maybe because the thrill was too intoxicating to resist. Or maybe because some part of them thought they could win, that their love would be the exception, that they could play with fire and not get burned. But history is littered with ashes. So here we are, standing at the threshold of their stories. We've set the stage, the castles, the contracts, the rules, the risks. We've peeked behind a curtain of power and seen the very human hearts beating underneath. And as we step further into this world, we'll meet the lovers themselves, the kings and queens, the knights and mistresses, who dare to break the rules. Some found brief happiness, most found tragedy, but all of them remind us that in the medieval world, even a glance could topple a throne. So let me ask you, if you were there, trapped in a world of cold duty and endless schemes, would you risk it all for one forbidden kiss? Now that we've set the stage, the castles, the contracts, the rules of the game, let's turn up the heat. Because here's the truth. Medieval Europe was one giant pressure cooker. And the thing everyone feared most? Not invasion, not famine, not even plague. No, the true terror was a question of bloodlines. Dynasties lived and died on their heirs. Entire kingdoms balanced on a baby's first cry. A king without a son was like a gambler holding empty cards at the table, waiting for someone to call his bluff. And if there was even a whisper of doubt about who fathered that child, about whether that heir was legitimate, it was political dynamite. Picture it. A queen gives birth. The court gathers to celebrate. But the whispers begin almost immediately. Does the baby really look like the king? Isn't his nose a little too much like that knight's? Didn't she spend far too much time in the gardens with her music tutor? And just like that, a dynasty's future hangs on gossip. This is why desire was so dangerous. Because an affair wasn't just scandal, it was war bait. It was succession disputes, rebellions, and bloodshed disguised as family drama. One kiss, one rumor, and suddenly cousins were raising armies against each other, banners flying high, all because someone doubted a baby's parentage. Kings and queens understood this. That's why who you slept with wasn't private. It was state business. And the bedchamber? That was the true battlefield of Europe. Forget swords and shields. Forget siege towers and catapults. The real wars were fought under blankets, behind closed doors, with candles burning low. And here's where it gets deliciously contradictory. The church thundered from pulpits that lust was a sin. Adultery? Mortal danger for the soul. Desire itself? A slippery slope straight to damnation. Priests warned that lovers who strayed would face eternal fire. But then you look at the kings, and the queens, and the nobles who nodded politely at Sunday Mass, only to sneak off to their lovers the next night. It's almost comical. The church said, "Control yourselves." And the king said, "Sure, Father, right after I meet my mistress in the West Tower." Because nothing says piety like building an entire chapel dedicated to atonement. Right after leaving your mistress's bed. This contradiction, the clash between church doctrine and human behavior, created fertile soil for both scandal and legend. Troubadours, those wandering poets, sang a forbidden passion. They painted it as noble, as pure, even when the church called it filth. Picture them strumming lutes beneath balconies, spinning tales of knights who would risk death for a lady's favor. Love was sinful, said the priest. Love was divine, said the poet. And stuck in the middle were real men and women, trapped between damnation and desire. Now, why did this contradiction matter so much? Because it meant that any affair, real or imagined, carried double the weight. Spiritually damning, politically explosive. You couldn't win. If you resisted passion, you lived in cold misery. If you gave in, you risked crowns, wars, and eternal fire. Quite the romantic choice, isn't it? Let's slow down and really imagine it. You're a young queen, bound by duty to a man you barely know. The church demands obedience. The court demands heirs. Your heart demands something else entirely. A glance from a knight makes your stomach twist. A secret letter makes your pulse race. You know the risk. You know one misstep could brand your children illegitimate, plunge the realm into civil war, or worse, send you to the executioner's block. And yet, the temptation remains. This is the heart of our story. The impossible choice between cold survival and fiery passion. But here's the twist. Sometimes, even without real affairs, the rumors alone were enough to start chaos. Enemies didn't need truth. They only needed suspicion. Whispers about queens and knights, kings and favorites, those close companions whose bond looked a little too intimate, spread like wildfire. Was it love? Was it friendship? Was it manipulation? The truth hardly mattered. Once the story spread, it took on a life of its own. And the stakes? Catastrophic, because in the medieval world, once a ruler's legitimacy was questioned, all bets were off. Rivals pounced. Wars erupted. And the people, the people loved a scandal. Gossip was a medieval tabloid press. Courtiers whispered in corners. Chroniclers scribbled rumors into history. And poets embroidered them into legend. Think about that. We remember kings and queens today not only for their conquests, their castles, or their crowns, but for their rumored lovers, their supposed scandals, their whispers in the dark. That's how powerful desire was. Stronger than armies, louder than sermons, more enduring than monuments. And isn't it ironic? The church tried to suppress lust. Kings tried to control it. Queens tried to hide it. Yet here we are, centuries later, still captivated not by their decrees or their treaties, but by their forbidden loves. Now, let's inject a little humor here. Because honestly, medieval rulers were obsessed with pure blood, as if centuries of cousin marriages made their dynasties paragons of genetic perfection. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Half the time, Heirs were born with more titles and teeth, and dynasties collapsed under their own inbreeding. Yet, heaven forbid a queen be accused of having a lover. That would taint the bloodline. The hypocrisy is staggering. But that hypocrisy made for drama. The kind of drama that toppled kingdoms. The kind of drama that shaped history. Let me tease you with a few infamous examples, without giving too much away just yet. There were queens accused of dalliances with knights, their reputations shredded, their crowns trembling on their heads. There were kings mocked for doting on their favorites, men whose influence over the throne made nobles grind their teeth in fury. And there were nobles bold and foolish, who believed a monarch's love would protect them until the executioner's acts proved otherwise. We'll get to their stories soon. But for now, just let the suspense build. Imagine the whispers echoing through castle halls. Imagine the pounding heart of a lover sneaking past guards. Imagine the cold dread of a ruler realizing the rumors have escaped their control. Because here's the truth. In the medieval world, desire wasn't just risky, it was political TNT. Every affair was a gamble with lives, with crowns, with legacies. Every whisper was a spark waiting to ignite. And once lit, that fire didn't just consume lovers, it consumed entire kingdoms. So ask yourself, if you were there, trapped in a world obsessed with heirs and pure blood, would you take the risk? Would you roll the dice on passion, knowing that one rumor could destroy everything you've ever known? Maybe you'd say no. Maybe you'd say you'd play it safe. But history tells us, again and again, that people did say yes. They said yes to love, yes to desire, yes to temptation, even as the noose waited outside the window. And because of them, their choices, their risks, their scandals, that we're still telling these stories today. So buckle in. The whispers are only getting louder. The shadows are growing darker. And the tales of love, lust, and legacy are about to burst into full flame. Now let's step closer. We've seen the castles. We've heard the rules. We understand the obsession with heirs and bloodlines. But here's where it gets even more dangerous. Because in the medieval world, the deadliest weapon wasn't the sword. It wasn't the axe. It wasn't even the catapult. It was the whisper. Picture a crowded court. Tapestries on the walls. Goblets in hand. Music drifting through the air. Everyone smiling, laughing, bowing at the right moments. But listen closely. Behind the polite words and fake laughter, there are murmurs. Quiet, sharp, lethal murmurs. She spends a lot of time with that knight, doesn't she? Funny how the king's favorite seems to be enjoying a little too much influence. Have you noticed the prince doesn't exactly look like his father? And just like that, boom, reputations collapse. Dynasties shake. Because in this world, gossip was political ammunition. It didn't even matter if the stories were true. Truth was optional. What mattered was who believed them and who could use them. Think about it. A queen could be faithful her entire life. But if her enemies needed an excuse to bring her down, they'd paint her as an adulteress. A king could simply enjoy the company of a close friend. But if the nobles hated that friend, suddenly it became evidence of corruption or worse. Lovers real and imagined were turned into scapegoats. Their names etched into history not for what they did, but for what they were accused of. And the chroniclers? Oh, the chroniclers loved a good scandal. Remember, history was often written by enemies. Kings who fell from power, painted as lustful fools. Queens who stood too tall, branded as unfaithful wolves. Nobles who rebelled, they subtly had a moral excuse, pointing to affairs and whispers to justify their treason. It's like medieval propaganda, except juicier. Imagine sitting in one of those smoky chambers. A group of nobles huddled together, plotting rebellion. One leans forward, eyes narrowed. We can't just say we hate the king's taxes. That won't win hearts. But if we say his queen is unfaithful, or his favorite is corrupting him, now that will stir the people. And it worked. Again and again. Gossip turned into justification. Rumor became rebellion. Desire, whether real or not, was the spark that lit political fires. Now, let's pause for a little humor. Because honestly, the lengths rulers went to in order to control gossip were absurd. Kings issued decrees against false rumors, as if a piece of parchment could silence courtiers with nothing better to do. Queens locked themselves away for months after giving birth, to prove the baby was definitely legitimate. Some rulers even staged bizarre public displays of loyalty, dragging lovers or favorites into ceremonies, parading them as nothing to see here, folks. And of course, that only made people whisper more. Because here's the cruel truth about gossip. The harder you try to bury it, the faster it spreads. Take a queen who laughs at a knight's joke during a feast. One laugh, innocent. Two laughs, suspicious. Three laughs? Congratulations, you've just fueled a scandal. And heaven help you if you exchanged a letter, or were caught in the same garden after dark. Innocence didn't matter. What mattered was perception. And once perception turned, it was nearly impossible to claw it back. So, was desire ever private? No, never. Every glance, every smile, every whisper in the wrong hallway was public property. And that's what makes this world so intense. Passion wasn't just an affair of the heart. It was a ticking bomb beneath the throne. Let's dig deeper into that idea. Because this wasn't just about two lovers in the dark. This was about survival, about power, about enemies waiting like wolves, ready to pounce at the first sign of weakness. Imagine a young king, newly crowned, already surrounded by rivals. He's inexperienced, unsure, but he finds comfort in one loyal friend. They spend time together. They laugh. They trust one another. And suddenly, the whispers begin. The king ignores his counsel. He favors his friend. He's blinded by affection. Are they lovers? Are they not? The truth is irrelevant. The nobles have their weapon. The king is weak, compromised, unfit to rule, and rebellion brews. Now imagine a queen, adored by the people, intelligent, charismatic. Her husband? Dull, controlling, insecure. She dares to speak her mind, to assert her influence, and instantly the rumors fly. She must be sleeping with someone at court. No woman could be that powerful on her own. Suddenly her intelligence becomes proof of infidelity. Her charisma becomes a crime. Over and over again, this pattern repeats. Desire, real or imagined, becomes the excuse for betrayal. And here's where it gets darker. These weren't just stories whispered behind fans. Gossip had teeth. Gossip killed. Lovers accused of betrayal could be exiled, imprisoned, executed. Queens stripped of crowns. Kings humiliated before their courts. Nobles dragged to scaffolds for crimes of the heart they may never have even committed. But the people lapped it up. Scandal was entertainment. Gossip was the medieval version of tabloids, of clickbait, of reality TV. Peasants starving in fields still whispered about the queen's supposed lover. Nobles risking war still gossiped about who shared the king's bed. It was irresistible. And here's the ultimate irony. Centuries later, we're still doing it. We remember medieval rulers not just for battles, but for scandals. Not just for crowns, but for lovers. Why? Because gossip is sticky. It clings to history like wax to parchment. So when we read of scandalous queens or weak kings undone by passion, we have to ask, were they truly guilty, or were they simply victims of rumor? Their enemies sharpening lies into daggers? This is where the tone shifts. Because yes, it's funny to mock the absurd lengths rulers went to in order to police desire. But it's also sobering to realize how many lives, real lives, were destroyed by whispers. Lovers executed. Queens condemned. Wars justified, not by truth, but by convenient lies. Picture standing in those halls, the weight of suspicion pressing down, knowing that one glance, one smile, one rumor could destroy everything. That's the reality they lived in. And that's why desire in the medieval world wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. So, as we close this introduction, let's hammer the point home. In medieval Europe, desire was never private. It wasn't just two hearts beating in secret. It was public, political, and lethal. It was a spark in a room filled with gunpowder. One whisper could set the whole place ablaze. And that's exactly what happened. Again, and again, and again. So are you ready? Because the stage is set. The whispers are growing louder. The torches burn low. And the stories of those who dared, those who risked thrones, crowns, and entire kingdoms for passion, are about to explode onto the stage. These aren't fairy tales. These aren't safe romances. These are scandals carved into history, with blood and rumor alike. And now, the real stories begin. Picture this. A summer's day in medieval Europe. The air thick with the smell of horses' sweat and roasted meat drifting from merchant stalls. A vast crowd gathers, peasants in coarse tunics, rubbing elbows with lord in velvet, all waiting for the spectacle to begin. Trumpets blare, drums thunder, and then out they come. Knights, gleaming in armor polished to a mirror shine, plumes bobbing on their helmets, banners snapping in the wind. To the crowd, it looks like war. But to many, this is something else entirely. This is dating medieval style. Forget candlelit dinners or awkward small talk. Courtship here meant shattered lances, thundering hooves, and possibly a broken rib or two. Because nothing says, "I'm into you," quite like skewering another man in front of your lady. The tournament was more than sport. It was theater, a performance of power, honor, and, yes, romance. For knights, it was their moment to shine, to prove worth not just on the battlefield, but in the eyes of the court. For ladies, it was a stage where glances, ribbons, and gestures spoke louder than 100 poems. And for kings and queens, it was politics, plain and simple. But let's start with the spectacle itself. Imagine the joust. 2 armored men astride massive horses, charging full speed with lances aimed straight for each other's hearts. The crowd gasps as with splinters, shields crack, and one knight is hurled to the ground. Cheers erupt, and then look closer, because while the masses cheer the violence, subtle exchanges are happening in the background. A knight rides up to the stands, bows low, and offers his broken lance to a lady. She smiles, barely. A small ribbon is slipped into his gauntlet, fluttering as he rides back to field. To us, it looks trivial. But to them, it's a message, a coded conversation, a signal of affection, or at least of favor. In many ways, these tournaments work like a medieval Tinder. Swipe left? Don't give the knight your ribbon. Swipe right? Toss him a handkerchief. Swipe up? Well, that meant the knight just risked his life to impress you, so maybe a polite smile is in order. Of course, it wasn't all swooning and flirtation. Behind the romance, tournaments were also political battlegrounds. Every victory humiliated someone. Every display of favor stoked rivalry. A queen's smile at one knight could enrage another family, turning courtly love into very real hatred. A king watching his wife's approving glance could suddenly wonder, is that just courtesy or something more dangerous? And that's the contradiction of these games. On the surface, they were all about ritual, pageantry, and play. But underneath, every glance, every gift, every ribbon carried political weight. Let's not forget the troubadours, the poets who turned these tournaments into legend. They sang of knights fighting not just for glory, but for love. They romanticized the broken lances as proof of devotion, the bruises as badges of passion. According to their songs, knights were noble warriors, and ladies were lofty ideals, untouchable muses inspiring bravery. But real life was far messier. Knights weren't flawless paragons. They were ambitious men clawing for favor. Ladies weren't passive muses. They were calculating, strategic, aware that a ribbon given to the wrong knight could ignite dangerous gossip. Now, picture being in that crowd. You're seated among nobles, fanning yourself in the summer heat. The knight's thunder passed, lances shattering, dust rising like smoke. The crowd roars, but your eyes are fixed not on the clash, but on the queen's hand resting lightly on the balcony, ready to drop a ribbon. If she favors the wrong knight, tomorrow's court will be chaos. This is what makes the tournament so intoxicating. On one hand, it's pure adrenaline. Horses charging, steel crashing, men falling. On the other, it's a delicate dance of courtship. Every gesture scrutinized, every reaction a potential scandal. And let's be honest, it was entertaining. For the peasants, it was the medieval equivalent of binge-watching reality TV. Who would win? Who would lose? Who would catch the queen's eye? For the nobles, it was a blood sport laced with gossip. And for the participants, it was high-risk courtship. A knight might win glory, or end up face down in the mud, armor dented, pride shattered, the lady of his dreams laughing politely into her goblet. But beneath the humor, the stakes were deadly serious. Because sometimes, the queen's ribbon wasn't just a token of affection. Sometimes, it became evidence. Evidence of partiality. Evidence of favoritism. Evidence of desire. And evidence in this world could kill. So was it romance? Or was it politics disguised as romance? The truth, probably both. Tournaments allowed love and passion to exist in public view, but always under the cover of spectacle. It was safe until it wasn't. Imagine the tension of being a young knight, eyes locked on a lady in the stands. You've risked your life to earn her ribbon. You win. You ride up triumphant, and she smiles. The crowd sees it. The king sees it. The rival nobleman sees. That smile might feel like heaven, but it could also plant the seed of rebellion. And yet, they kept doing it. Again and again, knights kept charging. Ladies kept giving ribbons. Queens kept smiling. Because for all its danger, there was something irresistible about love played out on a public stage. Now, let's add a touch of humor. Because really, imagine explaining this system to someone today. Oh, you like her? Great. Now go risk a concussion in front of 3,000 people while riding a half-ton horse. And if you don't die, maybe she'll give you a napkin. Talk about high-stakes dating. But jokes aside, these rituals mattered. They gave people a language of love in a world where marriages were contracts and passion was suspect. A ribbon wasn't just fabric. It was rebellion. A glance wasn't just affection. It was danger. And that's the contradiction this chunk leaves us with. Courtship in the medieval world was wrapped in ritual and spectacle, performed in full view of the crowd. But every gesture, every ribbon, every smile carried consequences far beyond romance. It could humiliate rivals, enrage kings, or spark whispers that spread like wildfire. So next time you picture a knight charging across a field, lance in hand, don't just see the clash of steel. See the glances exchanged in the stands. See the ribbons fluttering from gauntlets. See the subtle war of hearts being fought just as fiercely as the war of lances. Because in this world, even love had to be fought for in public. Even passion had to wear armor. And sometimes, a single glance across a jousting field was the most dangerous move of all. Picture a chessboard, black and white squares stretching endlessly. Each piece moved with precision. Every choice made a corner an opponent. Now imagine those pieces aren't pawns or knights. They're people, princes, princesses, queens, kings. And every marriage, every union, isn't about love, it's about strategy. Because in the medieval world, the bedchamber was the battlefield. Marriage was never just two hearts joining together. It was two dynasties locking arms, two empires drawing borders, two families signing a contract in flesh and blood. And the women, the queens, they were the queens of this game not because they had power to move, but because they were moved, like pieces, traded across kingdoms, wrapped in silk, handed off to strangers. At 15, a girl could be shipped across the sea to marry a man twice her age. At 16, she was expected to provide heirs. By 17, she was a mother. And if she failed, she was disposable, replaceable, a pawn that no longer served the board. Romantic, isn't it? Because nothing screams, "I love you," like being handed over in exchange for 3 castles, a pile of silver, and maybe a goat herd to sweeten the deal. Let's be clear, marriage in this world wasn't about passion. It wasn't even about companionship. It was survival. Marry the wrong ally, and your borders were vulnerable. Refuse a match, and you risked war. Say yes, and maybe, just maybe, you kept your dynasty alive for another generation. The expectations were suffocating. A queen's worth was measured in heirs. Sons specifically. Daughters were fine, but sons were destiny. Every royal pregnancy was treated like a state matter. Courtiers whispered, midwives were watched, and entire kingdoms held their breath waiting for the cry of a baby boy. Now pause. Imagine the pressure. You're a 16-year-old girl, far from home, married to a man you don't know, watched constantly, and told your value depends on producing the right child. Imagine carrying that weight every day, knowing one failed pregnancy or one daughter too many, and your entire position could collapse. It wasn't just pressure, it was a prison. And yet, in the cracks of that prison, passion smoldered. Because human hearts don't follow treaties. They don't obey kings. Behind the facade of diplomacy, love and lust became rebellion. Taking a lover wasn't just scandalous. It was defiance. It was saying, I am not just a pawn. I am not just a womb. I will take one thing for myself. Of course, the danger was immense. A queen caught in an affair risked not only her life, but the legitimacy of her children. An affair could unravel treaties, ignite wars, and plunge kingdoms into chaos. But that didn't stop them. Again and again, royal courts whispered about hidden lovers, secret trysts, forbidden glances. Why? Because in a world where everything was controlled, your marriage, your movements, even your fertility, desire was the last rebellion. And let's not pretend the men were saints. Kings, too, treated their marriages like contracts. They stood at the altar, smiled politely, and then often ran straight into the arms of their mistresses. It was expected, even normalized. The hypocrisy is staggering. Queens were condemned for affairs that could topple dynasties, but kings flaunted their mistresses openly, building entire palaces for them, writing them into history, and forcing their courts to bow. And the church? The same church that thundered against adultery? They often looked the other way when kings strayed, because kings wrote the tides. But a queen? God help her. One rumor of infidelity, and she was branded a Jezebel, a sinner, a traitor. This is why love, real love, became so dangerous. It wasn't just about two people. It was about power. Let's take a moment and imagine it. A royal banquet. The queen sits at her husband's side, jewel crown heavy on her head. She smiles, speaks politely, pours wine into goblets. But her eyes? Her eyes linger, just a second too long, on a knight at the far end of the hall. Maybe he's laughing. Maybe he's glancing back at her. To everyone else, it's nothing. To her, it's everything. A single glance in the sea of duty. A spark in a cold. Arranged marriage. But sparks are dangerous in a room full of kindling. This is where passion became rebellion. Quiet, private, but explosive. And the irony? For many of these rulers, their public marriages were loveless political arrangements. Yet their private rebellions, those stolen moments, those secret letters, felt more real than all the treaties in Christendom. Let's inject a little humor here, because the absurdity is too rich to ignore. Imagine today if every political negotiation had to end with a marriage. Congratulations, the trade deal is settled. Please hand over your daughter by sunset. Or better yet, we'll stop invading you, but only if you marry my son. And yes, he's 17 years older than you, and has bad breath. But hey, peace is peace. That was medieval diplomacy in a nutshell. But behind the absurdity was something very human. These people, trapped in castles, bound by duty, still craved freedom. They still wanted to choose. And when they couldn't choose publicly, they chose privately. Through lovers, through whispers, through rebellion in the bedroom. And every act of rebellion carried risk. A letter discovered, a servant who gossiped, a rival who used the affair as political ammunition. Nothing stayed hidden forever. And when the truth or even the rumor came out, the consequences were devastating. Exile, imprisonment, sometimes execution. So why do it? Why take the risk? Maybe because desire is stubborn. Maybe because the human heart is reckless. Or maybe because, in a world where everything was dictated, desire was the only thing that felt real. And that's the paradox of diplomacy in the bedroom. Publicly, marriage was about duty. Privately, it became the battlefield of desire. One side fought for heirs, borders, alliances. The other side fought for freedom, passion, and the faint hope of happiness. But here's the catch. These two sides always collided. Duty versus desire. Crown versus heart. And the result? Scandal. Betrayal. Rumors that rippled through courts like wildfire. This chunk closes with a truth we can't escape. Medieval marriage was never just a personal matter. It was political theater. And behind that theater, behind the smiles and the treaties, passion always smoldered. Sometimes it remained hidden. Sometimes it burned kingdoms to the ground. So remember this. The next time you picture a medieval queen draped in jewels, sitting beside her king, smiling politely, look closer. Behind that smile may have been suffocation. Behind those jewels, longing. And behind the facade of perfect diplomacy, a dangerous rebellion waiting to explode. Because in the medieval world, even in the bedroom, politics was never far away, and neither was desire. Now we step into the heart of it. The whispers are no longer just shadows in the hall. The names are no longer faceless. The stories are flesh and blood. Because behind every dynasty, every throne, there were people who dared to mix passion with power. Let's begin with a queen who could never be ignored. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Formidable, brilliant, magnetic. Eleanor was no shrinking violet, waiting in the corner while men played politics. She was politics. Heiress to the vast duchy of Aquitaine, she brought more wealth and land into marriage than most kings could dream of. First, she married Louis VII of France. Then, after a stormy divorce, she married Henry Plantagenet, who became Henry II of England. One woman, two crowns, more influence than nearly any queen before her. But Eleanor was more than a political prize. Rumor said she had a taste for troubadours, those wandering poets who sang of chivalry and forbidden love. Did she truly indulge in their affections? Or was it propaganda designed to undermine her power? Hard to say. What we do know is this. Eleanor dared to live boldly in a world that demanded queens stay quiet. She wasn't just a queen. She was a force. She rode with knights on crusade. She openly defied her husband. She supported her sons when they rose in rebellion against Henry. And whether or not the troubadour tales were true, the rumors alone were enough to make her dangerous. Because in the medieval world, a powerful woman with whispers of scandal was a powder keg waiting to explode. Now shift scenes. Across England, decades later, another ruler faced a scandal of passion. But this time, it wasn't a queen. It was a king, Edward II. From the start, Edward wasn't like other kings. He preferred the company of commoners. He enjoyed rustic pleasures, digging ditches, rowing boats, things considered beneath a monarch. And above all, he had one constant companion, Piers Gaveston. Gaveston. To some, he was Edward's dearest friend. To others, he was a king's lover. Chroniclers described their closeness in ways that blurred the line between loyalty and desire. Edward showered Gaveston with gifts, titles, and lands. He elevated him above the greatest nobles of the realm. And the barons? They hated him for it. They saw Gaveston as arrogant, greedy, corrupting the king. But perhaps what truly enraged him was the sense that Edward's affection, whether friendship or love, was more powerful than their politics. Gaveston wasn't just a courtier. He was the king's chosen. Imagine the court, nobles grinding their teeth as Edward lavishes attention on Gaveston. Barons fuming as Gaveston mocks them with nicknames. And Edward? He refuses to send him away. He brings him back again and again, even after exile. Love or loyalty, stronger than reason. But the barons had their answer. In 1312, they captured Gaveston, dragged him to Blacklow Hill, executed him brutally. And Edward? He was shattered. Now ask yourself, was his friendship? Was it love? Does it matter? Either way, Edward's devotion cost him dearly. It alienated his nobles. It weakened his crown. It set the stage for his eventual downfall. Passion, real or rumored, reshaped the destiny of a king. And then there's Henry II. Henry, fiery, restless, brilliant. A king who built an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. A man married to Eleanor of Aquitaine, whose force will rival his own. Their marriage was a storm, sometimes alliance, sometimes battlefield. But while Eleanor raised children and plotted rebellions, Henry found solace elsewhere. Her name was Rosamund Clifford, the fair Rosamund. She was young, beautiful, gentle where Eleanor was fierce. Chroniclers describe her as Henry's great love, the mistress who captured his heart. But love in a king's life was never just private. Rosamund became a legend, the king's hidden rose, the woman for whom he supposedly built a labyrinth at Woodstock. so she could not be found. Yes, a labyrinth. Imagine the absurdity. A king, ruler of half of Europe, constructing a literal maze to hide his mistress. It sounds like a romantic fantasy, a medieval soap opera, and maybe it was. The story may have been exaggerated, or even invented by Henry's enemies, but the rumor stuck, because that's the power of scandal. Whether Rosamund was truly hidden in a maze or not, her name became a symbol of Henry's weakness, his passion, his betrayal of Eleanor. And Eleanor, being Eleanor, did not take betrayal lightly. Legend says she found Rosamund and forced her to choose between poison and a dagger. In truth, Rosamund died quietly in a nunnery. But legend never cared for truth. It cared for drama. And the legend of Fair Rosamund still lingers centuries later because it captures the heart of the matter. Passion and power colliding in the lives of kings and queens. Now, let's step back and take it all in. Eleanor of Aquitaine, rumored romances shaping rebellions. Edward II, his devotion to Gaveston sparking outrage and violence. Henry II, his love for Rosamund turned into legend, used as ammunition by his enemies. These weren't isolated affairs. They weren't private dramas. They shaped dynasties. They fueled rebellions. They toppled reputations. And that's what makes these stories so irresistible. Because we're not just talking about love. We're talking about love in the halls of power. Love that could decide wars. Love that could rewrite history. Love that could bring down a king or elevate a queen. Picture the smoky halls of a medieval court. Torches flicker on stone walls. Nobles whisper in corners. Chroniclers scratch away at parchment, already shaping the story that will outlast the truth. In these halls, passion is more than desire. It's weapon. It's leverage. It's power disguised as romance. And through it all, humor flickers. The absurdity of kings hiding mistresses in labyrinths. The irony of queens accused of passion, just for being too intelligent or charismatic. The hypocrisy of nobles condemning scandals even as they indulge in their own. But beneath the humor lies danger. Real danger. Because these lovers weren't just characters in a play. They were human beings. And their choices, or the rumors about them, shook empires. So when we talk about medieval passion, we're not talking about fairy tales. We're talking about Eleanor, Edward, Henry. We're talking about real lives, real risks, real consequences. And as we close this chapter, one truth echoes through the ages. In the medieval world, desire was never just desire. It was power. It was scandal. It was a force that toppled order and lit the fuse for everything to come. By now, we've seen the tournaments. We've seen the marriages sealed like treaties. We've met queens who defied, kings who faltered, and lovers whose names still echo through history. But here is where the air grows heavier. Here is where passion turns poisonous. Because in the medieval world, love wasn't just risky, it was potentially fatal. Picture this. A moonlit garden. A queen slips from her chambers, her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. A knight waits in the shadows, heart pounding as he reaches for her hand. For them, it's a moment of tenderness. For the kingdom, it's a spark. And sparks, once seen, spread faster than wildfire. Because all it took was one misplaced letter. One servant listening behind the wrong door. One whisper dropped into the wrong ear. And suddenly that kiss, that glance, that secret meeting wasn't just scandal. It was treason. In a world built on fragile alliances, love became the perfect weapon. A rival didn't need proof. They only needed suspicion. A rumor could cripple a queen. A whispered story could topple a king. And enemies knew it. They thrived on it. They sharpened gossip into daggers and thrust them straight at the heart of power. Think of the medieval court as a nest of vipers. Everyone smiling, everyone bowing. But beneath the silks and smiles, fangs, always ready to strike. And the easiest target? Love. Because let's be honest, people love scandal. Then and now. But in the medieval age, scandal didn't just sell stories. It toppled dynasties. The courtiers were the original medieval paparazzi. They thrived on whispers. They magnified every smile, every laugh, every hand brushed against a sleeve. A queen laughs at a knight's joke during a feast. Clearly they're lovers. A king promotes his favorite a little too quickly. Obviously passion is involved. A prince spends too much time with his tutor. Better start planning a rebellion, because that child might not be the king's at all. And once the rumor began, there was no stopping it. Servants whispered in corridors. Nobles repeated it with knowing smirks. Chroniclers scribbled it into their records. Before long, the rumor was the truth. And truth, well, truth didn't stand a chance. Now, let's talk consequences. Because this isn't just idle gossip. Lives were on the line. Exile was common. A suspected lover might be banished, stripped of titles, cast into obscurity. Imprisonment was harsher. A queen accused of treason could find herself locked away in a cold tower, her jewels stripped, her children taken from her arms. And the ultimate punishment? Execution. Lovers dragged to the scaffold, their blood soaking the earth, all because someone whispered too loudly. Imagine the terror. You're a courtier, exchanging letters with someone you admire. One day, a guard bursts in. They found your note. Suddenly, your words of affection are read as treason. Suddenly, your life hangs by a thread. It sounds absurd. It sounds paranoid. But in a world where kingdoms hinge on heirs, where dynasties collapse over succession, it made brutal sense. If passion threatened the crown, then passion had to be silenced. And yet, despite the danger, people kept risking it. Again and again. Why? Because desire is reckless. Because love is defiant. Because sometimes, in a world where everything was controlled, that secret kiss felt more valuable than a kingdom. But the cost was always waiting. Let's take a step into those smoky council chambers. Rivals gather. The air is tense. One noble leans forward and says, "We can't accuse the king of poor judgment. That's treason. But if we say his favorite corrupts him, if we say there's an affair, that gives us justification." Another nods. A rumor is born. By dawn, it's echoing through the halls. By dusk, it's recorded in parchment. And by next week, armies are marching. That's how fragile it all was. Humor flickers here too, because sometimes the absurdity is hard to ignore. Imagine a medieval nobleman treating gossip like breaking news. Yes, sire, the crops have failed. Famine is looming. And also, your wife definitely made eye contact with that knight yesterday. We should invade France. But beneath the humor, the truth is grim. Real lives, real blood, real crowns lost, not because of war on the battlefield, but because of whispers in the bedchamber. Picture a young queen locked away in a tower. Outside, the people murmur about her alleged affair. She may be innocent. She may be guilty. It doesn't matter. The rumor has done its work. She's finished. Her children disinherited. Her name dragged through mud. All because love, or even the suspicion of it, crossed a thin line into treason. And that's what this world forces us to see. Love wasn't private. It wasn't safe. It wasn't even really personal. It was political dynamite. One kiss could topple a throne. One rumor could spark rebellion. And everyone knew it. So imagine living in that constant fear. Every gesture calculated. Every glance rehearsed. Every smile a gamble. What do? Do you hide your feelings? Do you risk them anyway? Do you choose duty over desire, or desire over survival? That's the tension at the heart of it. That's the thin, razor-sharp line between love and treason. And now, as our story edges toward the breaking point, you can feel it. The pressure building. The whispers growing louder. The glances more dangerous. We've seen the spectacle, the strategies, the legends. But here's where fire catches. Because desire can only simmer for so long before it boils over. And in the next act, it doesn't just smolder in gardens or linger in whispers. It explodes. In rebellions. In betrayals. In open conflict. The line between love and treason was always thin. And for some, crossing it meant ruin. For others, it meant rewriting history. But one thing was certain. Once you crossed it, there was no going back. Picture this. A stone hall. Cold. Echoing. Filled with the murmurs of nobles and clerics. At the center, Two figures kneeling, heads bowed, accused of a crime greater than theft, greater than murder, greater than treason itself. Their crime? Love. Because in the medieval world, passion wasn't just dangerous. It was deadly. Forget fairy tales. Forget troubadours singing of knights and ladies locked in eternal devotion. Reality was far harsher. Love affairs weren't celebrated. They were prosecuted. Lovers weren't praised. They were punished. Sometimes with exile. Sometimes with the sword. Sometimes with a block. Imagine a queen accused of adultery. Her enemies seize the moment. She is stripped of her crown, paraded before the court as a harlot, her every word twisted into evidence. Her lover, dragged through the streets, spat on, humiliated. His life ends in the dirt while the crowd cheers, convinced justice has been done. And yet, what was their crime, really? A kiss? A glance? A letter? That was enough. Here's the bitter truth. Medieval kingdoms feared passion more than plague. The Black Death might wipe out half the population, but rumor of infidelity? That could topple a dynasty overnight. Think about it. A plague killed bodies. But passion? Passion killed legitimacy. And legitimacy was a crown's lifeblood. If a queen's child was suspected of being illegitimate, wars could ignite. If a king was accused of being blinded by desire, rebellions brewed. If a noble dared to fall in love outside the lines of politics, rivals seized a chance to brand it treason. Passion wasn't private. It was a public hazard, and the punishments were brutal. Exile, imprisonment, torture, execution, all tools wielded without hesitation, because love in the wrong place, with the wrong person, was a threat to power. Now, let's add a touch of irony. Apparently, kissing the wrong person in medieval Europe was more lethal than catching the plague. At least with the plague, you had a chance of surviving. With scandal, the outcome was almost always the same. Ruin. Picture a trial. The hall is packed. Chroniclers sit with quills scratching furiously, ready to immortalize the downfall. The accused stand trembling, their love letters displayed as damning evidence. The court gasps as words meant for whispers are read aloud in booming voices. And then the sentence is passed. Banishment, chains, or worse. It's chilling, because love in this world wasn't judged by its purity or sincerity. It was judged by its consequences, and the consequences were nearly always catastrophic. Let's slow down. Imagine being in their place. You love someone. Truly, deeply, you write them letters. You steal moments in gardens. You risk everything for a fleeting taste of happiness. And then you're discovered, your private world dragged into the open, torn apart under the cold gaze of politics. Do you fight? Do you deny? Do you beg for mercy? It doesn't matter. The court has already decided. The whispers have already won. Your fate is sealed. The irony is sharp, almost cruel. These rulers could command armies. They could lay waste to cities. They could survive famine, plague, and war. But when it came to desire, one rumor, one affair, and their power crumbled. Take a moment and reflect on that. Kings feared love more than swords. Queens feared whispers more than poison. Nobles feared gossip more than death. And yet, they still risked it. Why? Because passion is stubborn. Desire doesn't obey crowns. It doesn't bow to treaties. It laughs at power. And when power tried to crush it, passion often fought back, leaving destruction in its wake. But let's be clear. This wasn't some tragic romance novel where the lovers are remembered fondly. No, most of them are remembered as cautionary tales. Their stories warped by chroniclers, their reputations smeared forever. Think about how unfair it was. History wasn't kind. If you were caught, you weren't just punished in life. You were punished in memory. A queen accused of adultery might forever be remembered as unfaithful, whether or not it was true. A king devoted to a favorite might forever be branded weak, foolish, corrupt. A noble executed for passion might forever be painted as reckless, sinful, deserving of their fate. It wasn't just about the act. It was about the story. And in the medieval world, stories were more dangerous than daggers. Now, let's add a little humor, because sometimes the absurdity can't be ignored. Imagine if medieval courts had tabloids. Breaking. Queen spotted smiling at night during feast. Treason confirmed. Or king gives favor a new title. Scandal 11. Honestly, the gossip would have made modern reality TV look tame. But the laughter dies quickly. Because unlike reality TV, these stories ended in blood. Picture a scaffold. The crowd gathers, buzzing with anticipation. The accused are dragged forward, their hands bound. They kneel. The executioner raises his blade. And in one stroke, gone. Two lovers, silenced forever. Their passion erased in blood. Their story twisted into a warning for others. And yet, we still remember them. Not for their guilt or innocence, but for the sheer danger of what they represented. That passion could shake kingdoms. That love could topple crowns. That desire could terrify rulers more than any army. This is the heart of the medieval paradox. Power was absolute. Thrones were mighty, yet they were fragile. Fragile enough to be threatened by whispers of love. Fragile enough to collapse under the weight of scandal. Fragile enough that one kiss could rewrite history. So let me ask you, if you lived in that world, would you take the risk? Would you gamble everything for passion, knowing that exile, chains, or death awaited if you were caught? Would you risk your dynasty for a fleeting moment of desire? It's easy to say no. Easy to claim we'd be rational, careful, loyal. But maybe, just maybe, if we lived in their world, we'd understand. Maybe we'd understand why queens risked everything for one night of freedom. Why kings clung to favorites despite rebellion. Why nobles risked scandal for something that felt real. Because sometimes the price of desire didn't matter. Sometimes the heart refused to be silenced, no matter how sharp the blade. But make no mistake, this was never safe. Love in the medieval world wasn't tender. It wasn't private. It wasn't harmless. It was trial by fire, a game with loaded dice. And the house, the crown, almost always won. So as we leave this chapter, let's carry the truth with us. Forbidden love wasn't just a scandal. It was a death sentence waiting to be written. A gamble where the stakes weren't just hearts, they were thrones. And more often than not, the lovers paid with their lives. Picture this. A candle burns low in a chamber of stone. Curtains drawn tight. Two figures whisper in the dark, believing themselves safe, believing the walls won't betray them. But outside the whispers already spread. Servants know. Courtiers suspect. Enemies sharpen their daggers, not of steel, but of words. Because in the medieval world, the bedchamber wasn't private. It was the deadliest battlefield of all. Here, betrayal could wound deeper than any sword. Queens were accused of adultery. Kings mocked for doting on favorites. Nobles tangled in webs of desire, only to find themselves pawns in someone else's power game. And when betrayal touched the bedroom, humiliation followed like a shadow. Let's imagine the scene. A love letter discovered beneath a pillow. Tender words. Promises of eternal devotion. Read aloud in court, each sentence twisting into evidence. A ribbon dropped carelessly on the floor, carried into the hands of a rival who smiles as they whisper, proof. A candlelit chamber turned into a crime scene, where desire itself was the weapon. This was betrayal in its most intimate form, not just of lovers, but of kingdoms. Because once infidelity was suspected, everything collapsed. A queen accused of loving a knight, suddenly her children's legitimacy is in question. Are they heirs to the throne, or bastards unworthy of the crown? A king mocked for indulging a favorite too deeply. Suddenly the barons cry corruption, claiming the monarch is blinded, weak, unfit to rule. And the humiliation? Public, relentless. Imagine your entire country gossiping about your bedroom, like it's the medieval version of Twitter. Every feast becomes a minefield of smirks. Every sermon becomes a subtle jab. Chroniclers, those ever-watchful journalists of their time, scribble your shame into parchment that outlives you. The betrayal itself might have been private, but the fallout? It was always a spectacle. Think of the power of jealousy. A rival lord whispers poison into a king's ear. Your queen, she spends too much time with her ladies-in-waiting. Too much laughter. Too many glances at that night. Whether true or not, Suspicion burrows into the mind, and once suspicion takes root, trust rots away. And when trust dies, so does security. Some betrayals were real, others entirely invented. But in both cases, the results were devastating. Marriages broken, dynasties discredited, wars justified, all because someone decided to weaponize desire. Picture a queen dragged before her husband's council, her face pale in the torchlight. She denies everything, swears loyalty, but her enemies have already prepared their evidence. A misplaced jewel, a careless word, a servant's testimony. The court gasps, the king looks away, and the queen knows, innocent or guilty, she is already lost. Now imagine the king's side of it. A ruler mocked for showering affection on a favorite. His barons mutter that the kingdom's wealth is being squandered, that decisions are made not by reason but by love. Maybe it was friendship, maybe it was passion. Either way, his enemies twisted into weakness. And a king seen as weak, he's already half overthrown. The bedroom was never safe. It was a political arena, more dangerous than any battlefield. You could win wars with armies and still lose your throne to whispers of betrayal. Let's not forget the lovers themselves. The knights, the ladies, the companions who dared to step too close. Many of them thought love would protect them. That royal affection was a shield. But more often than not, they were pawns. Used, betrayed, cast aside when the scandal grew too large. Some ended their lives in exile, wandering in disgrace. Others ended them on the scaffold, their bodies broken as public warnings. Imagine the humiliation. One day you are the king's favorite, showered with gifts and titles. The next, you are dragged through the streets, spat on by the same people who once bowed to you. That was the price of betrayal. That was the cruelty of scandal. And yet, beneath the cruelty, there's irony. Because so many of these betrayals were never proven. They lived in the realm of rumor. Innuendo. A smirk here, a whisper there. But in medieval courts, rumor carried the weight of fact. Once enough people believed it, it didn't matter whether it was true. Truth was irrelevant. Perception was everything. And perception could kill. Picture yourself in their shoes. Imagine lying awake at night, wondering if your smile at a night was seen, if your letter was intercepted, if your enemy was already whispering your downfall into the king's ear. Imagine waking each morning knowing your fate could hinge on gossip. It was a suffocating paranoia. And yet, it never stopped people from risking it. Again and again, rulers gambled with love. Again and again, trust was broken. The betrayals weren't always of the heart. Sometimes, they were political betrayals disguised as romantic ones. Rivals accused queens of affairs not to prove sin, but to undermine dynasties. They accused kings of favoritism not to highlight passion, but to justify rebellion. Desire was just the excuse, the spark used to ignite larger fires. But in the end, the personal and political were one. A kiss became treason. A glance became betrayal. A bedroom became the front line of war. And when the accusations came, there was no escape. A queen could weep, a king could rage, a lover could swear loyalty until their last breath. But once betrayal was declared, the script was already written. Humiliation, punishment, erasure. It leaves us with a haunting thought. What was real and what was rumor? How many betrayals actually happened? And how many were manufactured by enemies? We'll never truly know. But history records the whispers, not the silences. And those whispers became truth. So what do we take from it? That passion in the medieval world was never safe. That trust was fragile. That the very place meant to be most intimate, the bedroom, was, in truth, the most dangerous battlefield of all. Here, hearts broke. Here, crowns cracked. Here, betrayal was not just a matter of love, but a matter of survival. Because in this world, the price of desire wasn't measured in heartbreak. It was measured in humiliation, exile, and death. And as the stories unfold, as we move deeper into the web of passion and scandal, one truth becomes clear. The closer love came to the throne, the sharper the knives grew in the dark. Picture this. A kingdom not shaken by armies or famine, but by whispers, by words scrawled on parchment, murmured in candlelit halls, or sung in taverns. Truth and lies braided together until no one could tell where fact ended and rumor began. This was medieval propaganda, because in the Middle Ages, gossip wasn't just small talk. It was a weapon. Myths, rumors, carefully planted stories. They were sharper than any dagger. They could cut reputations to pieces, bring down monarchs, and justify entire wars. And at the center of this tangled web, one of the most infamous women in medieval history, Isabella of France, the so-called She-Wolf. Now, let's ask the question, was Isabella truly the ruthless, unfaithful villain she's been painted as? Or was she a victim? Framed by hostile chroniclers desperate to blacken her name, the story goes like this. Isabella was married to Edward II of England, a marriage already complicated by Edward's close, perhaps too close, bond with his favorites, first Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser. Isabella found herself isolated, ignored, sidelined, when she eventually joined forces with Roger Mortimer, leading an invasion that toppled Edward. The chroniclers went wild. She-Wolf of France, they cried. Adulteress, usurper, murderess of her husband. But slow down. Let's examine that. Was she truly a she-wolf? Or was this just a smear campaign, medieval fake news, designed to paint her as a monster, so no one would question the messy politics behind Edward's downfall? Think about it. Chroniclers were rarely impartial. Most were men, often aligned with the church or with noble factions hostile to Isabella. And a powerful woman? A queen who dared to seize control, lead armies, and claim authority? That was threatening. That was unnatural. So, what better way to delegitimize her than to frame her as a creature, part woman, part beast, driven by lust and cruelty? Sound familiar? It should, because propaganda works the same way today. Turn your enemy into a villain. Make them inhuman. Sell the story, not the facts. Imagine the medieval equivalent of tabloid headlines. Isabella sleeps with traitor. Queen poisons husband, seizes throne. Scandal in the palace. England ruled by lust and betrayal. That's what the public consumed. That's what history recorded. But here's the chilling part. Once the rumor existed, truth no longer mattered. Isabella could deny. Mortimer could swear innocence. Edward could rage. It didn't matter. The narrative was fixed, and centuries later, we're still repeating it. That's the power of rumor. Now, Isabella is just one case, but her story shows us the larger pattern. Rulers and rivals weaponizing gossip. Want to overthrow a king? Don't just challenge him on taxes or wars. Accuse him of being blinded by lust, corrupted by a lover, or betrayed by his queen. People love a scandal. People rally behind a moral excuse. And suddenly your rebellion looks like justice. It happened again and again. Queens accused of adultery to discredit heirs. Kings mocked for their favorites to justify coups. Nobles painted as seducers or poisoners, so their executions looked righteous instead of political. And the human cost? Devastating. Picture a queen, innocent of all charges, locked in a tower because her enemies spread whispers she'd been unfaithful. Picture her children stripped of legitimacy, branded bastards, their futures ruined. Picture a loyal companion dragged to execution. Not because of real treason, but because the king's enemies convinced the court that affection equaled corruption. This wasn't truth. This was narrative warfare. Now, let's pause for a little humor, because it's too tempting not to. Medieval propaganda was basically the original clickbait. You won't believe what the Queen did last summer. Top 10 reasons a king's favorite is destroying the country. Number 3 will shock you. And the people? Oh, they ate it up. Because scandal is irresistible, whether in parchment or pixels. But once we laugh, we have to look at the darker side. Because unlike clickbait, this wasn't harmless distraction. This was life and death. People died because of rumors. People lost crowns, families, futures. History itself bent under the weight of lies. So ask yourself, how many of history's greatest scandals were ever real? And how many were carefully staged lies? Was Isabella truly a she-wolf? Or was she a scapegoat for a coup her enemies needed to justify? Was Rosamund Clifford really hidden in a labyrinth? Or was that a tale spun to make Eleanor of Aquitaine look vengeful? Was Edward II truly undone by love, or was corruption by favorites the excuse his enemies used to erase him? We'll never know for sure. And maybe that's the most haunting truth of all. Because once a story is written, once a rumor becomes legend, it sticks. Truth fades, gossip endures, and centuries later, we're left with echoes, unsure where the line lies. That's why we call this world murky. A world where history itself is suspicious. A world where the most scandalous tales may have been propaganda, carefully sharpened to pierce reputations. So picture yourself in that smoky medieval hall again. Nobles lean in close, plotting rebellion. One says, "We need the people on our side." Another replies, "Spread the word. The queen is unfaithful. The king is corrupt. Their bedchamber is rotten. Once the people believe it, the throne is ours." And by dawn, the whispers have already begun. By dusk, the rumors are gospel truth. And by next week, a dynasty is on its knees. That is the terrifying magnetic power of rumor. So as we move deeper into these stories, keep one thought in mind. Not everything we think we know about medieval passion is fact. Much of it may be fiction, slander, carefully constructed lies. But those lies were strong enough to change history, strong enough to kill, strong enough to make sure some of the most powerful men and women of their age are remembered not for their victories, but for their supposed sins. And maybe that's the greatest scandal of all. Picture this. A throne room filled with silence. Courtiers tense. A king, red-faced with fury, clutching a letter that should never have existed. A queen, pale, trembling, accused of betrayal. And outside, armies begin to gather. Because in the medieval world, passion didn't just ruin reputations. It drew blood. This is where the stakes escalate. Where desire stopped being a whisper in the garden and became a roar on the battlefield. Where a kiss could ignite rebellion. Where a rumor could topple dynasties. Where pillow talk could, quite literally, become battle plans. Let's step into one of these storms. Edward II, again. His devotion to favorites like Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despenser wasn't just scandal. It was war bait. Nobles watched in disgust as Edward showered them with gifts and power. They whispered, they plotted, and eventually they rose. Rebellions tore through England, fueled not only by political grievances, but by rage at the king's perceived blindness. And when the barons executed Gaveston, it wasn't just punishment, it was a warning. They were saying, "Choose your favorites over us, and you will bleed." And bleed Edward did. His crown weakened, his reign shattered, his throne eventually stolen by his own wife, Isabella of France, who marched against him with an army. Love, loyalty, favoritism, whether true or twisted, set England ablaze. Now shift the lens. Henry II, his affair with Rosamund Clifford, the so-called Fair Rosamund, might seem like a personal indiscretion, but passion never stayed personal. Eleanor of Aquitaine, his wife, was no meek consort. She was powerful, cunning, and utterly unwilling to be humiliated. The whispers of Rosamund didn't just damage Henry's marriage, they fractured his dynasty. Eleanor supported her sons in rebellion against him, a family torn apart, an empire cracking under the weight of desire. Rosamund herself? She paid the price in legend. Some say Eleanor poisoned her. Others say she died quietly in a convent. Either way, her name became a symbol of how one affair could ripple through kingdoms, sparking betrayal, rebellion, and bloodshed. And then there's the case of Louis VII and Eleanor before she married Henry. Their disastrous union ended in divorce, in part because Louis accused Eleanor of inappropriate intimacy with her uncle during the Second Crusade. Was it true? Maybe not, but the suspicion alone was enough to collapse their marriage. And when Eleanor remarried Henry, she brought half of France with her. One whispered scandal reshaped the entire map of Europe. That's the terrifying pattern. Passion didn't just embarrass rulers. It redrew borders. It shifted dynasties. It set swords clashing. Now, let's pause for a little sarcasm. Who knew that pillow talk could become international diplomacy? Or, better yet, international warfare? Imagine your private love life being treated as a legitimate reason to launch an invasion. Sorry, sire. She smiled too warmly at her cousin. Time to mobilize the army. Absurd, right? And yet it happened. Again and again. Because in this world, the personal was political, and the political was bloody. Let's walk through another example. Isabella of France, again, our she-wolf. When she allied with Roger Mortimer, her closeness to him wasn't just personal scandal. It became the justification for revolution. Nobles rallied behind her not only because Edward II had alienated them, but because they could frame Isabella as a wrong queen taking back power from her corrupt, love-blinded husband. And when Edward was overthrown, when Mortimer was executed, it was passion, true or imagined, that served as a spark. See the pattern? Love wasn't just a feeling. It was fuel. It fed rebellions. It justified executions. It became propaganda for armies. And the executions, they were never quiet. They were public. Picture a crowded square. A lover accused of treason dragged forward. The crowd jeers, shouting slurs, convinced that their humiliation of the king or queen is being avenged. The executioner raises his blade. A head falls. Blood stains the earth. And the people cheer, not just for justice, but for scandal-quenching violence. That was the medieval solution. Silence passion with steel. But it never really worked, did it? Because the blood didn't wash away the whispers. If anything, it made them louder. Think about it. Gaveston's execution didn't kill his story. It immortalized it. Rosamund's death, whether in poison or peace, didn't erase her legend. It amplified it. Isabella's scandal didn't disappear when Mortimer was hanged. It cemented her reputation forever. Love turned to bloodshed. Bloodshed turned to legend. And legend outlived them all. Now imagine being a ruler in that world. You're not just planning battles. You're not just balancing treasuries. You're balancing passion like a torch in a room filled with oil. One misstep, and the whole kingdom explodes. You can win every war abroad, but lose everything at home because of a glance, a rumor, a single night that history will never let you forget. That's the terror. That's the suspense. Because here, desire wasn't just scandalous, it was lethal. A single affair could send nobles into revolt. A single suspicion could spark betrayal. A single favorite could turn allies into enemies. And so rulers tried to control it. They tried to silence gossip, to banish lovers, to punish affairs. But passion has a way of slipping through cracks. You can chain armies. You can build fortresses. But you can't chain hearts. And when hearts rebelled, kingdoms bled. It leaves us with a haunting irony. Thrones commanded armies of thousands. Kings could decide life and death with a gesture. Queens could shape treaties that spanned continents. But in the end, they were undone not by swords, but by whispers in the dark, by kisses in the wrong chambers, by secrets too tempting to resist. So ask yourself, what's more powerful, the sword of a king or the rumor of his lover? In the medieval world, the answer was clear. Desire didn't just ruin reputations. It started wars. It toppled crowns. It soaked the ground in blood. And as the whispers grew, as the stakes climbed, one truth became undeniable. Passion was no longer private. It wasn't just scandalous. It was lethal. So the question isn't whether love existed in the medieval courts. It did. Fiercely. Recklessly. The question is, was love worth the blood it spilled? And history's answer is written in crimson. Picture this. The torches are burned low. The echoes of trials, rebellions, and betrayals have faded. And now we're left with a question that lingers like smoke after a fire. Were these medieval lovers courageous rebels, or just reckless fools blinded by desire? Because history doesn't give easy answers. It never does. Let's revisit them one by one. Queens, who risked their crowns, sometimes their lives, for the fleeting embrace of passion. Were they brave? Brave enough to defy marriages forged like chains. Brave enough to carve out scraps of humanity in a world where they were pawns in the game of dynasties? Or were they foolish? Foolish enough to gamble everything on secret meetings and whispered words, when they knew the punishment was humiliation, exile, or death. Think of Isabella of France. To some, she's a she-wolf. A conniving adulteress who betrayed her husband and plunged England into chaos. To others, she's a wrong queen, seizing control from a neglectful king, a woman who dared to wield power in a world that despised powerful women. Villain? Victim? Visionary? She was all three, depending on who held the quill. And what of Edward II? A king mocked endlessly for his devotion to favorites. To his barons, he was weak, blinded by affection, unfit to rule. But to those who looked deeper, he was perhaps simply human, yearning for companionship in a role that demanded he be more symbol than man. Was he a fool for loving openly? Or was he a tragic figure caught in the cruel machinery of politics? Eleanor of Aquitaine, magnificent, magnetic, and unyielding. She was accused of scandal more than once. But was it scandal? Or was it independence misread as sin? She defied two kings, commanded armies, and became the heartbeat of dynastic politics. Was she reckless, or was she brilliant, weaponizing her reputation as much as her alliances? And then the so-called Fair Rosamond, forever remembered as a doomed mistress of Henry II. Did she truly weave herself into the downfall of queens and kings? Or was she simply a woman swallowed by legend, turned into a symbol of seduction and betrayal because history needed a scapegoat, brave rebel, or an unwilling pawn? We'll never know. That's the irony. History remembers them as villains, victims, or visionaries. Sometimes all three, depending on who wrote the story. Now pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what would you call them? Would you call them heroes? People who dare to defy the suffocating rules of dynastic marriage? People who refuse to be reduced to political contracts? Or would you call them fools? People who let desire blind them to the stakes, who gambled kingdoms for kisses, who thought love could stand against thrones and armies. There's no easy answer, because the consequences were too extreme. Some of these lovers paid with their lives, executed, poisoned, banished, erased. Others paid with humiliation that clung to their names for centuries. Their passions were twisted into weapons by enemies, transformed into propaganda, amplified until fact and fiction became inseparable. And yet, their stories still fascinate us. Why? Because they remind us that behind the crowns, behind the treaties, behind the polished surfaces of medieval power, there were people, flawed, vulnerable, hungry for something more than titles and castles. That's what makes it tragic. That's what makes it timeless. We laugh at the absurdity sometimes. Imagine your entire kingdom gossiping about your bedroom, like it's a medieval Twitter feed. It's funny until we remember the stakes. Until we remember that those whispers weren't harmless. They killed, they toppled, they rewrote history. So lovers are fools. Maybe both. Maybe bravery and recklessness are two sides of the same coin. Maybe every secret meeting, every stolen kiss, was both an act of courage and a step toward destruction. And maybe that's why their stories grip us. Because we see ourselves in them. The longing, the risk, the defiance. Who among us hasn't made foolish choices for love? Who among us hasn't ignored reason in the heat of passion? The difference, of course, is that our foolish choices don't usually cost kingdoms. Now, let's lean into the suspense. Because if these were the scandals, if these were the tales of queens humiliated, kings mocked, dynasties shattered, just wait until you see what comes next. Because scandals were only the beginning. Scandals whispered, but turning points screamed. Scandals humiliated, but climaxes destroyed. The lovers you've just met, some defiant, some desperate, some damned, they were the prelude. Their stories set the stage. Their whispers prepared the ground. And now we're about to walk into the moments where passion truly changed history. Moments where kings fell, where crowns cracked, where thrones shook. So ask yourself one more time, were they lovers or fools? Because once you see the turning points, once you witness the shocking truths that rip kingdoms apart, you might discover they were something else entirely. They were the spark, and the fire is still burning. Picture this. A king on a throne, not a warrior king with blood on his sword, not a strategist with maps sprawled across the table, but a man, soft-eyed, affectionate, devoted. A king whose greatest loyalty was not to his barons, not to his kingdom, but to the companions he loved most. That king was Edward II of England, and his heart, oh, his heart, was his undoing. From the moment Edward ascended the throne, One name clung to him like a shadow: Piers Gaveston. Charming, dashing, brilliant with words, reckless with ambition. Gaveston wasn't just a friend. He was a flame. And Edward fed that flame with everything he had. Jewels, lands, titles, honors, whatever Piers desired. Edward handed over as though the crown itself were a toy chest. Now pause. Imagine being one of Edward's barons. You've risked your life in wars. You've spilled blood for the crown. And what do you get? Nothing. Meanwhile, this foreign-born favorite struts through court, dripping in jewels, mocking nobles with nicknames, flaunting his power like a peacock. Would you be furious? Oh yes, and the barons were. They whispered. They plotted. They fumed that Edward's bed was steering England's fate. Gaveston, they claimed, was corrupting the king, twisting him, draining the treasury, poisoning the realm. And maybe they weren't entirely wrong, because Edward's devotion to Gaveston was absolute, more absolute than his loyalty to the man who kept his throne standing. And in a world where loyalty was everything, that was dangerous. The tension snapped. The barons rose. They banished Gaveston once, twice, 3 times. And each time, Edward brought him back. Each time, Edward defied his nobles with the stubbornness of a man in love. Picture the frustration. Picture the fury boiling in baronial halls. Every recall of Gaveston was a slap in the face. Every jewel Edward handed him was another insult. Finally, rebellion exploded. Gaveston was captured, dragged before Edward's enemies, and executed. Brutally, publicly. Edward wept. He raged, but he could not stop it. His love had been torn from him, and the throne shook beneath his grief. You might think he learned his lesson, that he realized passion could cost him everything. But no, enter Hugh Despenser. Darker, more calculating, less charming than Gaveston, but hungrier. Where Piers flaunted, Hugh schemed. And Edward? He adored him. If Edward had showered Gaveston with gifts, he drowned Despenser in power. Land seized from nobles, wealth stripped from the crown's rivals, honors piled so high that resentment festered like a wound. And this time, it wasn't just the barons who hated it. The Queen, Isabella of France, watched her husband's devotion with growing contempt. She was ignored, humiliated, cast aside, while Hugh sat at Edward's side like a co-king. Imagine the whispers now. The king has abandoned his wife. He listens only to his lover. England is ruled by greed and lust. The barons plotted again, but rebellion is a fire that feeds on fuel, and Edward kept tossing logs into the flames. Despenser grew richer. Nobles lost everything. Edward clung tighter, convinced Hugh was his salvation. The kingdom fractured. Barons rose in open revolt. The Queen herself turned against him, aligning with Roger Mortimer, her lover and ally, and together they forged an invasion. Picture the scene. Edward, once the crowned King of England, scrambling in panic. His queen, leading armies against him. The very nobles who once knelt at his feet, now sharpening blades for his downfall. All because of love, or obsession, or perhaps both. And here's where irony strikes hardest. Edward was mocked for being more loyal to his lovers than to his nobles. And it was true. He clung to Gaveston. He clung to Despenser. But he couldn't cling to his crown. His capture was inevitable. Isabella's forces crushed him. Mortimer pulled the strings. Edward, the King of England, was dragged into custody. Powerless, broken, the once mighty ruler became a prisoner. His downfall a spectacle whispered across Europe. The reason? Not just politics, not just economics, but the simple, devastating truth that a king's heart can be a kingdom's ruin. Now let's pause, because there is dark humor in this tragedy. Edward, the king, entrusted the fate of England to men who thrilled him, who comforted him, who made him feel alive. And in return, he lost everything. Imagine running a kingdom like a reality show where the star is whoever the king fancies most this week. Disaster was inevitable. But beneath the humor, the story is haunting, because Edward wasn't just a fool. He was human, a man who loved deeply, stubbornly, dangerously. And for that, he was destroyed. The whispers of his favorites became the pretext for rebellion. His devotion became his greatest weakness. And in the end, his crown slipped away not in battle, but in betrayal. So, what do we make of Edward II? A fool blinded by passion? A king undone by desire? Or a tragic figure? Human, vulnerable, desperate for companionship in a world that demanded he be nothing but a symbol? History doesn't answer. History only records the whispers. But one truth is undeniable. Edward's heart was louder than his crown. And when the heart ruled, the throne fell. This was the beginning of the climax. The moment where passion didn't just scandalize, it toppled a king. And as Edward sat in captivity, stripped of power, mocked by the world, one question hung in the air. If love could destroy a king, what would it do to the kingdoms yet to come? Picture this. A woman who defied the very idea of what a medieval queen should be. Not a silent consort, not a shadow at the edge of the throne, but a force of nature. Bold, brilliant, unyielding. Her name? Eleanor of Aquitaine. And she wasn't just a queen. She was two queens, first of France, then of England. A woman who collected crowns like other people collected jewelry. And trust me, she wore both with more audacity than most kings of her age. From the beginning, Eleanor was different. Born heiress of Aquitaine, one of the wealthiest duchies in Europe, she grew up in a world drenched in poetry, music, and the songs of troubadours. Imagine walking through her court, filled with laughter, with verses praising love, with whispers of courtly passion. For Eleanor, love wasn't a whisper in the shadows. It was art. It was culture. It was power. And power, Eleanor understood better than most. Married first to Louis VII of France, she quickly proved she was no docile bride. Louis was pious, cautious, timid. Eleanor? Fiery, independent, restless, oil and water. Their marriage was a battlefield of personalities. She wanted adventure. He wanted prayer. She wanted a king. He wanted a monk's robe. During the Second Crusade, their differences boiled over. Whispers swirled. Eleanor, too close to her uncle, Raymond of Antioch. Was it love? Was it scandal? Or was it just propaganda, sharpened by enemies who feared a queen with too much influence? We'll never know, but the damage was done. The marriage collapsed. Louis and Eleanor divorced. Now pause and imagine the jaws dropping across Europe. Queens didn't just walk away from kings. That wasn't how the story went. But Eleanor wasn't just any queen. She was Eleanor of Aquitaine. And within weeks, she remarried. Not just anyone. Henry Plantagenet. The future Henry II of England. If Louis had been cautious, Henry was the opposite. Ruthless, ambitious, hot-tempered. Together, they were dynamite. And at first, the spark burned bright. Passionate, fiery. Two strong wills colliding in bed and in council chambers. Eleanor wasn't just his wife. She was his partner in empire building. She gave him 8 children, including future kings Richard the Lionheart and John. Together, they stitched together a vast dominion that stretched from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. But passion cuts both ways. Henry strayed, repeatedly, and Eleanor, never one to be silenced, didn't forgive easily. The love that once bound them became a battlefield. Affairs, whether Henry's or Eleanor's rumored dalliances with troubadours, turned into weapons of humiliation. Whispers painted her as too free with her affections, too bold with her desires. Was it truth, or just another smear to tame her defiance? Either way, the rumors fueled her legend. And when Henry tried to sideline her, when he ignored her influence and flaunted his mistresses, Eleanor struck back. Picture her in candlelit halls, plotting with her sons. Richard, Geoffrey, young Henry. Together, they turned against their father. It was a rebellion not just of politics, but of passion, pride, and power. Eleanor, Queen of England, mother of princes, openly defying her husband the king. Now pause. Humor slips in here. Because truly, what kind of queen organizes a family rebellion like it's a holiday gathering? Children, pack your swords. We're rebelling against your father this summer. Only Eleanor, only her audacity could make such a plan believable. But beneath the wit, the danger was real. This wasn't a lover's quarrel. This was war. Henry crushed the rebellion. His son submitted. But Eleanor paid the price. Captured, imprisoned, locked away in castles for years. A queen turned prisoner. A wife silenced. A mother cut off from her children. And yet, did she break? No. Eleanor waited. Patient. Calculating. Because she knew time was on her side. When Henry finally died, her son Richard took the throne. Richard the Lionheart, her favorite. And Eleanor was free. Free not just as a mother restored to her son, but as Queen Mother, the power behind the crown. She ruled as regent while Richard went on crusade. She negotiated alliances. She defended England. She traveled across Europe, well into her 70s, arranging marriages and holding power with iron resolve. Think about that. In an age when most women were dismissed as pawns, Eleanor wielded power for decades. She shaped dynasties. She defied kings. She outlived almost everyone who had tried to silence her. But let's return to the central question. Was Eleanor defined by love or by defiance? The truth is, she was both. She embraced a culture of courtly love, surrounding herself with poets and troubadours who turned passion into poetry. She became the muse of legends, the queen of romantic ideals. But she also turned love into politics, using passion as both a weapon and a shield. When Henry's affairs cut her, she struck back with rebellion. When her own reputation was smeared, she transformed it into a symbol of independence. Was she a lover? Yes. Was she a strategist? Absolutely. And perhaps more than anyone else of her age, she proved that passion and politics could never be separated. Imagine her riding at the head of armies, banners snapping in the wind. Imagine her in candlelit chambers, debating with kings and barons, her voice sharper than any blade. Imagine her refusing to bow, refusing to break, even as rumors paint her as dangerous, scandalous, unfaithful. That was Eleanor. And here's the irony. History tried to cage her in scandal, tried to reduce her to whispers of affairs and rumors of defiance. But she outmaneuvered it. She left behind not shame, but a dynasty that reshaped Europe. Sons who became kings, daughters who became queens, alliances that altered the map of the continent. Was she reckless? Perhaps. Was she audacious? Without question. But was she effective? More than any king who tried to control her. So, Eleanor of Aquitaine, lover or rebel, romantic or revolutionary. The truth is, she was all of them. A queen who refused to be only one thing. A woman who lived fiercely, who loved defiantly, who changed history not in spite of her passions, but through them. And maybe that's the lesson her story leaves us. That passion, when wielded with courage, can be as powerful as armies. That love, when combined with defiance, can shake empires. So when you hear her name whispered through the centuries, don't imagine her as a pawn of scandal. Imagine her as she truly was. Riding tall, eyes blazing, a crown on her head and fire in her heart. Eleanor of Aquitaine, the queen who refused to bow, the queen who defied kings, the queen who rewrote the rules. Picture this. A castle at midnight. The halls are silent, the air damp with stone and smoke. A torch flickers against the wall, throwing shadows that seem alive. And in those shadows, secrets move. Lovers slipping through hidden doors. Servants carrying whispered notes. Poison mixed into wine as easily as honey into tea. This is the darker side of medieval passion. The side where desire didn't just risk humiliation. It risked death. Because in a world of crowns and daggers, an affair wasn't just scandalous. It was treason. And treason could kill. Let's walk into those corridors now. Imagine a queen, restless in her chambers. Her husband distant, cruel, or unfaithful. She waits until guards change, then disappears into a passage carved into the castle walls centuries before. The torchlight flickers. The stone is cold. At the end of the tunnel, a knight waits, heart pounding. Their meeting is desperate, forbidden, intoxicating. But it's not safe. Every step, every kiss, is a roll of the dice. Because discovery doesn't mean embarrassment. Discovery means ruin. Discovery means the scaffold. And sometimes it wasn't discovery that ended it. Sometimes it was poison. Poison, the perfect medieval weapon. Silent, secret, delivered in a goblet of wine, a sugar cake, a vial slipped into broth. The weapon of those who wanted blood without battle. And in affairs of the heart, poison became an all-too-frequent companion. Take the legends of Eleanor of Aquitaine. In one story, part truth, part myth, she discovered her husband Henry II's mistress, Rosamund Clifford, the fair Rosamund. Beautiful, young, beloved, Henry kept her in a hidden bower, guarded by mazes and secret doors. But Eleanor found her, and what happened next? The tale says Eleanor offered Rosamund a choice, dagger or poison. Death either way. Did it truly happen? We'll never know. Chroniclers love to weave fables dripping with drama, but the rumor alone shows how people saw queens and mistresses locked in a dance, not just a love, but a death. And really, nothing says romance like a good old-fashioned poison chalice. But behind the sarcasm lies terror. Because in medieval courts, you never really knew what was in your cup. A feast might look like celebration. A banquet might look like joy. But every sip could be your last. And the suspects? Always the same. Jealous rivals. Angry husbands. Lovers betrayed. Imagine it. A king raises his goblet at a feast. He laughs, drinks deep, and moments later, clutches his chest. Gasps echo through the hall. Eyes turn, searching for culprit. The queen? The mistress? The ambitious noble with too much to gain? Poison didn't just kill bodies. It poisoned trust. And in castles where alliances were already fragile, suspicion itself was as deadly as venom. But poison wasn't the only threat. There were the shadows, the secret doors, the hidden staircases that turned castles into labyrinths of intrigue. These passages weren't just architectural quirks. They were lifelines. Lovers used them to sneak into chambers unseen. Conspirators used them to eavesdrop. Assassins used them to strike. Picture yourself walking through one. The walls close narrow. Your breath echoes in the dark. At the end, a door opens into a royal chamber. The king asleep, or the queen waiting, or perhaps someone waiting to end your life. These hidden places blurred the line between romance and danger, because secrecy and risk were one, and love lived in both. Affairs became battles fought in silence. One wrong step in the dark corridor, one careless servant whispering to the wrong ear, and a private passion became public treason. And yet, people risked it anyway. Because in the medieval world, where marriages were political cages, desire needed shadows to survive. Lovers stole moments not in gardens or fields, but in passages thick with dust and dread. They risked poison, daggers, discovery, because passion was worth it. Or at least, they thought it was. The consequences? Devastating. Queens accused of poisoning rivals. Kings accused of conspiring to murder lovers' husbands. Courtiers dragged into dungeons on the flimsiest of rumors. Sometimes guilty, sometimes innocent, always destroyed. One thing is certain. In these Gothic tales, passion and betrayal were inseparable. Love could inspire poetry. It could inspire music. But just as easily, it could inspire murder. And maybe that's what makes these stories feel more like thrillers and romances. Not gentle ballads, but tragedies written in venom and shadow. Think of Isabella, of France again. The rumors that surrounded her, plotting with Roger Mortimer, conspiring to overthrow Edward II. Some said she poisoned her husband. Some said she let him die in agony. Was it true? History blurs. But the very fact a rumor existed shows how closely people linked passion with poison, romance with death. Because in the medieval imagination, forbidden love never ended quietly. It ended in blood. Now pause. Step back. What do we see? A world where castles weren't just fortresses, but stages for human drama. Where torchlit halls became backdrops for whispered plots. Where secret doors turned lovers into criminals, and goblets turned dinners into executions. And humor? It has little place here. Except the dark kind. Because yes, it's absurd. choosing between a dagger and poison as though they're items on a menu. Yes, it's ridiculous that kings build entire mazes just to hide their mistresses. But beneath the absurdity, the fear is real. The risk is fatal. This is the heart of the Gothic side of medieval love, where shadows conceal as much as they reveal, where secrets are currency, where passion is indistinguishable from peril. So what does it mean? It means that in the Middle Ages, love was never innocent. It was never just between two people. It was entangled in politics, power, and survival. And sometimes it demanded blood. The lovers who slipped through secret doors weren't just chasing desire. They were dancing on the edge of the grave. The queens accused of poison weren't just jealous. They were trapped in worlds where betrayal was their only weapon. And the kings who toasted at feasts lived in constant fear that their goblets carried more than wine. This was passion at its darkest. Passion wrapped in shadow. Passion that killed as often as it comforted. And as we leave this chapter, one thought lingers. In a world where love was so often bound to power, maybe it was inevitable that it so often ended in poison. Because in these stories, desire didn't just risk scandal. It risked death. And every kiss in the dark could be the last. Picture this. A throne room thick with tension. Courtiers whisper. A parchment is unrolled. The words echo across the hall. Adultery, betrayal, treason. And just like that, an affair, true or not, becomes a spark for war. Because in the medieval world, passion wasn't always the real crime, but it was a perfect excuse. Accusations of affairs, whispered, shouted, written into decrees, were weapons sharper than any sword. They rallied rebels. They justified coups. They toppled dynasties. And often, it didn't matter if they were true. What mattered was that people believed. Imagine a queen accused of lying with a knight. Suddenly, her children's legitimacy is questioned. Are they heirs to the throne or bastards bore a scandal? Nobles rise, claiming the dynasty is rotten, that the king is deceived. Armies gather, waving banners not of greed but of justice. Picture the irony. Entire kingdoms marching to war, not over land, not over taxes, but because of what may or may not have happened behind closed doors. It sounds absurd. And yet, it happened again and again. Take Isabella of France once more. When she allied with Roger Mortimer against her husband Edward II, the whispers of their affair became more than scandal. They became propaganda. Nobles rallied behind her, claiming England needed saving from a king corrupted by lust and blinded by favoritism. The truth didn't matter. The accusation gave rebellion its moral cover. And when Edward fell, his enemies declared it justice, not just for politics, but for dishonor. Now imagine crowds, rioting in the streets, shouting accusations as though they'd witnessed every embrace, every whisper, throne rooms echoing with shouts of treason, armies riding out, banners snapping in the wind, claiming to fight not for greed but for honor. That's the breathless chaos of affairs as weapons of war. And it wasn't just queens. Kings, too, were targeted. Accuse a king of loving too much, of showing favor too freely, and suddenly his allies turn against him. Call it corruption. Call it weakness. Dress rebellion in the clothes of morality. Take Edward II and Hugh Despenser. The barons didn't just hate Hugh's greed. They hated the intimacy, the favoritism, the sense that the king was ruled not by reason, but by love. So they painted Despenser as a corrupter, Edward as a besotted fool. Their revolt wasn't rebellion, it was rescue. Rescue from a king who, they said, had abandoned his duty for passion. It was propaganda genius. And it worked. The pattern repeated across Europe. Noble families accusing rivals of affairs, poisoning reputations to justify war. Kings declaring wars of honor, when really they wanted land. Scandal was the smokescreen. Passion the mask that had ambition's face. Picture parchment decrees nailed to church doors. The queen is guilty of betrayal. Her lovers will be punished. Picture nobles standing in crowded halls, voices trembling with outrage, demanding justice for dishonor. Picture the armies gathering outside, weapons gleaming, ready to avenge a queen's sins. But what they really avenged was power denied. Let's pause, because there's a bitter humor here. Imagine mobilizing thousands of men, fueling rebellions, emptying treasuries, all because someone claims a queen smiled too warmly at night. Pillow talk is pretext for civil war. It's ridiculous, it's tragic, and yet it was deadly real. And the scapegoats? Always the same. The lovers, they became pawns in the game. Sometimes willing players, sometimes victims, but almost always destroyed. A knight accused of lying with a queen was doomed. Even if innocent, the accusation itself was enough. Trial by rumor, execution by suspicion. His blood spilled not for love, but for politics. A queen accused of betrayal was finished. Whether or not she had an affair, her reputation was shattered, her children's legitimacy questioned, her power stripped, her life often reduced to prison walls or the cold blade of justice. They were pawns, sacrificed to give rebellion its story. And yet, sometimes they played the game themselves. Sometimes they wielded passion as a weapon. Sometimes they invited scandal, knowing it gave them leverage, knowing it made them unpredictable, dangerous, hard to control. Eleanor of Aquitaine again, whispers of her affairs, true or not, amplified her aura of defiance. Her reputation for independence became a weapon she could wield against her husband Henry II. A scandalous queen was terrifying to her enemies, but also magnetic. People rallied to her because she wasn't silent, because she refused to be caged. Affairs real or invented were double-edged swords. Deadly, yes, but sometimes powerful. Still, the chaos they unleashed was staggering. Picture the streets of London, filled with mobs crying out against corrupt favorites. Picture French barons riding to war, banners raised high, claiming to fight for virtue. Picture dynasties collapsing, not under foreign invasion, but under the weight of whispers. This was passion at its most dangerous, not just scandalous, not just humiliating, but weaponized. And by the end, the lovers themselves fade. Their whispers, their embraces, their desires. Those were sparks. Sparks used to light fires of war. They were remembered less as people and more as excuses. That's the tragedy. Medieval lovers weren't just victims of passion. They were scapegoats for ambition, tools in hands that wanted crowns. Their names twisted, their reputations rewritten, their fates sealed by wars far larger than themselves. And yet, sometimes they weren't just victims. Sometimes they played the part. Sometimes they stepped willingly into scandal, gambling that love could be power. Sometimes they embraced the danger, knowing it could shake thrones. Were they brave? Were they reckless? Perhaps both. But one truth remains. Affairs were never private. They were weapons. Weapons wielded by enemies, by lovers, by kings and queens themselves. Weapons that justified bloodshed, toppled dynasties, and rewrote history. So as we close this chapter, take a breath. Feel the chaos. Throne rooms echoing with accusations. Parchments announcing trials. Armies marching out, drums pounding, banners high, claiming to defend honor, when really they were seizing power. And realize the chilling truth.